This is the chapter on genetics or inheritance, and before I talk about the details of inheritance, I'd like to explain to you a few terms. Now, the meaning of these terms will become clear as I explain the processes and the events of inheritance in a different video. But for right now, you simply have to know these terms or at least heard of them. Otherwise, you cannot make meaning of the other videos as well. So let's start off quite simple. What is genetics? Genetics is nothing more than the study of inheritance. And what is inheritance is the study on how characteristics are passed on from the parents to their children. And we are not only talking about human inheritance here, but the first systematic studies on inheritance were actually done on pea plants. Plants have certain advantages because they can be grown under controlled conditions. Okay, let's move on over here. What is a gene? A gene is an inheritable factor, for example, the gene for eye color. A gene can be passed on from parents to their children. It is a term which was not used when inheritance was first studied. So at that time, Gregor Mendel, who is considered the father of genetics, he did not talk about genes, he talked about factors. Right now we call them genes. And here there's also an allele, and this is a specific form of a gene, for example an allele for blue eyes. So gene is like a a general category of a characteristic, and there are different versions of this. So if I have over here a chromosome, this is supposed to be the centromere where the two sister chromatids are held together. Let's start over here. If I have over here the gene for flower color, gene for flower color, and however, different plants might encode here a different allele. So some plants might have red flowers, others might have white flowers, whatever. So there are different possibilities for the actual information which is written here. And these are referred to as alleles. There are two types of alleles, dominant alleles and recessive alleles. So some of these alleles are stronger than others, and those that are stronger are referred to as dominant. We don't say stronger, we say they're dominant. And here we have two other terms, homozygous or heterozygous, because in eukaryotes, the alleles are generally present at least two times. Now there are plenty of exceptions, but the alleles are present two times. And homozygous means that, as I will explain later, if the two alleles are the same, then it is shown, but if the two alleles are different, then it's also shown. I will give an example later. So the dominant one is able to cover up the recessive one. And the recessive one is only shown, it's only expressed when in homozygous states, when there are two times a little r, when there's a two times a little r present. Again, the definitions here might be a little bit confusing at first if you do not know how inheritance actually works, but I think it's good if you still note this down for later. So let's move on. Over here now, I have two homologous chromosomes, and I will use, let's say down here, over here, flower color, the same example from before. And homozygous means is over here, if I have a capital R, a big R, that's the dominant one for flower color, which is red flowers. And if on the homologous chromosome over here, I have also a capital R, then then the plant is referred to be as homozygous or pure. And in this case, 2 times capital R. It could also be 2 times lowercase r. You might now wonder, what about the sister chromatid over here and over here? What do we have over here? we do not talk about that because it's clear if I have a big R over here because it's the identical DNA, there must be a big R over here as well. But we completely ignore that because it simply copied DNA. We talk about homozygous and heterozygous always when we look at so-called homologous chromosomes. So let's have another example down here, heterozygous, if there are two different alleles, capital R, lowercase r. Let's use, for example, plant size. Down here, let's say that tall is dominant. So I will make a big T over here. And over here, I will have the recessive allele, a lowercase t. And if a plant carries something like this, then it is homozygous in relation to flower color, because this is the flower color gene. Flower color. And it is heterozygous in relation to size, plant size. Okay, so that is basically the concept over here. You can also refer to heterozygous as being hybrid. That's simply a different term of referring it. Homo means same, hetero means different. Homozygous plants can also be referred to as being pure or purebred. Bred is the past tense of breeding. So, when we talk about genetics, we want to cross different organisms, and the first studies were done on plants. And a monohybrid cross, a mono refers to single, a monohybrid cross is when you cross plants or organisms and you only look at one factor, at one gene. So, if we only are worried about flower color and we forget about plant size, then we refer to it as a monohybrid cross. If we want to consider both of them together, then it's a dihybrid cross. But most of the examples that I'm going to give refer to monohybrid crosses. And the dihybrid crosses is when you consider two characteristics as one, such as flower color and plant size. So that is basically then a little bit more complicated, but there will be separate videos on that. So, and the genetics terms, they continue. I have a nice little picture of an alligator over here, but there are two more terms. Genotype. The word gene is hidden in here, and the genotype are the alleles which are present in organisms. And sometimes you know the genotype by looking at the organism. There is a condition called albinism, and sometimes you don't know that. So over here, before I talk about this, let's talk about the next one. So the phenotype are the characteristics of an organism. So my phenotype in relation to my gender is I'm a male, I'm a man. My genotype referring to hair color is black hair. So these are the characteristics which are present. It does not always mean that you can see them, because some of them are hidden inside the body. So for example, a blood type is also a phenotype, but you cannot really see it. You just have to do a test to find out. So over here I have an alligator, and what is the phenotype of this alligator in relation to its skin color? And the phenotype is of course white. It looks white. And what is the genotype? Well, I have to tell you that we did not talk about albinism yet, but if there's an albino animal, then the genotype is little a, so it is homozygous recessive. Because we it's a lowercase, and it's homozygous because it's 2 times little a. And the condition is known as albinism. Again, a little more on that later. I just wanted to apply and show you how phenotype and genotype are used, because sometimes people write down the word white when they are actually asking for the genotype and vice versa. So this was an overview of important genetics terms which will be used in the subsequent videos.